They came to the tomb at dawn, hearts heavy, eyes swollen from tears. But what Mary Magdalene saw that morning would change the course of history forever. Welcome to Midnight Psalms, where the most powerful moments of Scripture come alive in the quiet hours. Here, we dive deep into the stories that shaped eternity, unveiling the human emotions behind the divine encounters. The sky was still wrapped in the last shades of night when Mary's footsteps pressed softly against the damp earth, each step a silent echo of grief that had not found rest since the cross. She carried spices in her hands, the weight of them nothing compared to the heaviness in her chest, for this was not just an errand of devotion, it was an act of love in the shadow of loss. The streets were empty, the air cool and tinged with the scent of stone and earth after the night's dew. Her mind replayed the final moments, the sound of the hammer, the cry that tore through the heavens, the stillness that followed. She had been close enough to see the lifelessness in his eyes, yet too powerless to stop the tide of injustice that swept him away. Her feet moved with urgency, but her heart lagged behind, torn between the desire to honor him and the unbearable truth of what awaited her beyond that garden gate. The garden was quiet, the kind of quiet that felt sacred, as if creation itself held its breath in reverence for the one who had lain there. The tomb stood in the distance, cut from rock, its entrance sealed by the stone she had seen rolled into place with merciless finality. But as she drew closer, something stirred unease in her spirit, a shift, a wrongness she couldn't yet name. The early light began to stretch its fingers across the ground, and with it came a chill not from the air but from the sudden realization that the stone was not where it should be. Her heart quickened, pounding against her ribs, not with hope but with fear. Fear that his body had been taken, that even in death he could not be left in peace. The jar of spices trembled in her grip as her steps broke into a run, every thought a storm of confusion and dread. Her breath caught when she reached the tomb, for the great stone had been rolled away, the darkness inside exposed to the breaking day. She stood at the threshold, her chest rising and falling, and peered inside, half expecting to see the still form wrapped in linen. But instead, emptiness. The burial cloths lay where he had been, folded with a care that made no sense in a scene of theft. The silence inside was almost unbearable, pressing against her ears until it seemed to whisper the impossible. She staggered back, her hands clutching the air as if trying to hold onto reality. The question burned in her mind, raw and desperate. Where have they taken him? Her voice cracked in the stillness, and the echo returned to her as if the garden itself was holding back an answer she could not yet bear to hear. Mary turned and ran, her sandals striking the path toward the others with urgency. The words spilled from her lips as soon as she reached Peter and John. "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." The two men, startled and wide-eyed, raced past her toward the garden. She followed behind, her legs aching but her mind burning with the image of the empty stone slab. She watched as they entered, their eyes scanning the scene, their faces caught between disbelief and dawning wonder. Yet they said nothing certain, only exchanged glances heavy with questions too big for words. Peter lingered, touching the linen cloths as if they could explain the mystery, while John stood just outside, his gaze fixed on the hollow place where light now fell. Then, without conclusion, they left, returning to where they had been, leaving Mary standing in the half-light, alone with her tears. The garden seemed to close in around her, each leaf trembling under the weight of her sobs. She bent down, unable to stop herself from looking once more into the tomb, as though this time the body might be there, as though grief could rewrite reality. But inside, instead of emptiness, there were two figures, men clothed in garments so radiant they seemed woven from the morning sun itself. They sat where his body had been, one at the head, the other at the foot, their faces calm yet filled with a knowing beyond her reach. One of them spoke, his voice gentle yet carrying the weight of heaven. "Woman, why are you crying?" Her words tumbled out in anguish. "They have taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they have put him." She didn't even pause to question how they were there, for her sorrow left no room for wonder. As she turned from the tomb, still blinded by tears, she saw another figure standing nearby. The shadows of the garden played across his form, and his presence seemed at once ordinary and unshakably commanding. "Woman," he said, "why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking him to be the gardener, Mary's voice shook as she pleaded, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." The silence that followed felt like the pause before dawn breaks in full, the world holding its breath for a moment of revelation. Then he said her name, just her name, Mary. And in that instant, the darkness shattered. It was as if the entire world narrowed to that single word, spoken with a tenderness that no one else could give. She lifted her eyes, and the truth blazed against the dimness. This was not the gardener. This was her teacher, her Lord, alive and standing before her. "Rabboni!" she cried, the sound breaking from her like a bird freed from its cage. She moved toward him, the instinct to cling to him overwhelming, but he raised his hand gently, not in rejection, but in purpose. "Do not hold on to me," he said, "for I have not yet ascended to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." The command was both a gift and a mission, turning her sorrow into the very first announcement of resurrection. Her feet no longer felt the weight of the path as she ran. Every step carried a flame now, a joy so fierce it made her chest ache. The same garden that had witnessed her weeping now seemed alive with light, the leaves glittering as if the morning dew itself was rejoicing. The tomb, once a place of despair, had become the doorway to hope, a monument to victory no one had imagined. She reached the others, breathless, her face radiant with the impossible truth. "I have seen the Lord," she declared, her voice carrying the echo of eternity into the room. And though some would doubt, her testimony would stand as the spark that began to light the world. The moment at the tomb was not just for Mary. It was for every soul that has stood in the shadow of loss, believing the night would last forever. Her journey through grief into joy is the blueprint for every heart aching to see the dawn. In her tears, we see our own. In her confusion, our own questions. In her revelation, the promise that death is never the final word. The voice that called her name still calls ours, shattering despair with recognition and love. And the command she received still stands, a call to go and tell, to carry the news that transforms graves into gardens. For those who walk through dark gardens today, Mary's story is a reminder that the stone can be rolled away when least expected, that what you came to mourn can become the place you meet the living Christ. Her mourning began with spices and sorrow, but ended with a mission and a miracle. And perhaps, that is the way of all who follow him. We come to offer what little we have, and leave carrying what the world could never give. The garden is still quiet in the early hours, but if you listen closely, you can almost hear it, the sound of a name being spoken in love, the beginning of everything new. If you are enjoying this video, please like, subscribe and hit the notification bell to help this channel reach more people. Now let's continue. Mary's feet had barely touched the ground as she made her way back to the disciples, her heart pounding with a rhythm that felt like heaven itself was urging her forward. The morning air tasted different now, lighter, sweeter, as though creation had been holding back until this moment, waiting for the news to be spoken aloud. She pushed through the doorway where they hid, their eyes heavy with fear and grief, and without hesitation she let the words spill out like living water. "I have seen the Lord." Her voice cut through the air, her joy undeniable, but the room met her with silence, the kind born from disbelief. Some exchanged glances as if weighing the impossibility, others lowered their eyes, unwilling to hope. Yet Mary's gaze did not waver, for she knew that what she had seen was not a dream, and no doubt could erase the warmth of his voice calling her name. In the days that followed, Mary's encounter became a quiet ember burning in the hearts of the disciples, a story they could not fully believe but could not forget. She replayed the moment over and over, the way his eyes had met hers, the sound of her name carried on the wind, the peace that settled over her like sunlight breaking through clouds. Every time fear threatened to creep back in, she returned to that garden in her mind, to the empty tomb and the folded cloths, to the realization that death had been undone. It was not just about what she had seen, it was about what it meant. If he had risen, then everything he had promised was true. Her life, once defined by the shame of her past and the whispers of the crowd, was now anchored in the truth of the resurrection. Mary had known loss before, she had felt the hollow ache of being unwanted, the sting of judgment in the eyes of others, but nothing compared to the darkness she had felt when Jesus was placed in the tomb. He had been the one who saw her not for what she had done but for who she could be, the one who had freed her from the chains that no one else could see. To lose him had been like losing the very air she breathed. And yet, in one word, her name, he had given it all back. The garden was no longer a place of mourning but a sanctuary of hope. Every time she thought of it, she realized something profound. It wasn't just that he had risen, it was that he had risen and chosen to appear to her first. The choice was no accident. Out of all the followers, all the witnesses he could have chosen, he appeared first to a woman whose past had been marked by shame, whose voice had once been disregarded. In that moment, he redefined worth, not by status, not by perfection, but by love. He entrusted her with the first declaration of the resurrection, placing in her hands the greatest news the world would ever hear. This truth burned within her, not as a burden but as a joy too great to contain. Every step she took after that morning carried the weight of her calling, every word she spoke shaped by the authority of one who had seen the impossible made real. She became, in her own way, the first preacher of the risen Christ. As Mary continued her days among the believers, the memory of the tomb never faded. It was not something she needed to hold on to out of fear of forgetting. It was etched into her soul. She would often find herself awake in the early hours, when the world was still and quiet, and the air was heavy with the same kind of silence she had felt in that garden. She would close her eyes and imagine it again. The stone rolled away, the empty slab, the voice that spoke her name. It was in those hours that she understood the fullness of what he had said. Go and tell. It wasn't just a command for that moment. It was a mission for her life. The others began to see it too. Even when doubt lingered among them, Mary's certainty was unshaken, and it gave them something to hold on to. She became a living reminder that hope is not built on what we can see but on the one who calls us by name. Her faith became a lighthouse in the uncertainty, guiding others toward the truth she had witnessed. And though the path ahead would be filled with challenges, persecution, and sacrifice, the memory of that morning was a shield against despair. For Mary, there was no going back to the life she had before. Once you have seen the Lord, the world can never look the same again. Years later, when the first flames of persecution began to burn hotter, Mary still carried the same fire in her spirit. She spoke of him not as a distant figure from the past but as the living presence who had stood before her in the garden. Her story became a testimony passed from voice to voice, traveling far beyond the streets of Jerusalem. It was told in homes lit by small oil lamps, in marketplaces where whispers carried more power than shouts, in gatherings where believers risked everything to remember the one who had conquered death. And in every telling, she would pause at the same moment, letting her listeners feel the weight of it, before repeating the word that had changed her life: Mary. That word had been more than recognition. It had been restoration. In it was the forgiveness she had once thought impossible, the calling she had never imagined, the love she had spent her life searching for. When he spoke her name, he was not just identifying her, he was reclaiming her from the darkness. It was a reminder that in his kingdom, no one is too far gone, no past too stained, no heart too broken. Her life became proof that grace is not just an idea but a living power, one that can turn the lowest moment into the first step toward a future filled with light. Even now, her story speaks across centuries to those who find themselves standing in their own dark gardens, wondering if the stone will ever be moved. It reminds us that sometimes the miracle does not come in the way we expect. Sometimes it begins with a name, spoken softly in the dawn, breaking through our tears. Mary's testimony is not just about seeing the risen Christ. It's about recognizing him in the moments when hope feels lost. And just as she was sent to go and tell, so are we. The mission is the same, the news no less powerful: he is alive. If you carry this truth in your heart today, let it be more than a belief, let it be a calling. The same voice that spoke Mary's name speaks yours, inviting you into the joy of resurrection life. You are not forgotten, not overlooked, and not beyond the reach of his love. Like Mary, you are called to go and tell, to share the hope that has turned graves into gardens for generations. And as we close, remember, your name is known in heaven. If this story touched you, stay with us here at Midnight Psalms, where we bring moments like this to life in the quiet hours. Subscribe, share this message, and let it reach someone who needs to hear that the dawn is breaking.